Chapter 6. I have always struggled to explain my relationship with my siblings. Confiding in Nick is easy, as he is by far the most empathetic and the only available good listener. The other two have always been more difficult. Autumn clearly wants others to believe that everything comes easily to her, and that she does not take anything too seriously. But in my experience, the opposite is true. In all of our years of training together, she never once failed to break a sweat. She is smart, strong, and skillful, but beneath all that is an effort she tries so hard to hide. When someone's entire identity is constructed atop a lie like that, it is difficult to hold a real conversation with them. Despite that, I have always been curious about one thing. If she secretly does care, then she must have some sort of opinion on the moral stance of the Indigalo Federation that she dares not share. She is surely intelligent enough to understand that not all of the suffering we inflict is necessary, but she refuses to ever comment on it. Nick and I, while our stances are complex, clearly have mixed feelings. Chuck lacks the intellect to construct his own ideas. There is little to say about Chuck beyond that. He is a dull tool that cuts regardless, regurgitating the Federation's simplest rhetoric without pausing to dissect any of it. The walk through the tunnel was at least an hour long, if not longer. While I silently marveled at the time it would take to dig a route like this, my siblings chattered behind me.
So what's up with this minister guy? How did he become such a threat?
Asked Chuck, vexed by the very concept of resistance.
Nothing about him as an individual is actually threatening,
answered Autumn.
We just know that he has some Gilded Indigalo weapons and managed to rile up a hefty lot of Filibranos.
Well, I'd say that's exactly what makes him a threat,
argued Nick.
Yeah, he's got some scary swords and tough armor, but his ability to speak to the masses and rally them under a cause like this is really what puts him on the map. From my research, it seems like he has really been able to take advantage of recent Federation activity in Filibrano territory to accumulate significant power.
Chuck was unimpressed.
You sound like such a sorcerer, Nick. I just hope Zed lets me finish off the old brute. Starting a fire sounds fun too, though.
I remained silent at first, but Autumn did not let me stay that way.
Yeah, Sergeant Zed. Who's doing what? How are we even going to start a fire large enough to take this place down?
Without much thought, I blurted out a plan. I'll take Nick and deal with Zebulon. You take Chuck to collect flammables once the whole place is cleared out. Look for oils, dried food, timber, and then either a torch or a candle. There are no light bulbs in Felibron.
Zed, are you sure about this?
Nick clarified, questioning his ability to hold his own against the most infamous Felibrano warrior in recent history. Something came over me again. Yes, Nick, if you're going to be like that, then feel free to sit back and watch. I could cut him down by myself. Nick shut up. We had made it to the end of the tunnel. There was an old rickety ladder, mounted on an old stone wall leading up to a decaying wooden panel in the upper wall. It looked easily removable, and had plenty of gaps and holes to peer through. Taking the lead, I stepped up to the ladder and placed my eye against an opening. Inside was a surprise. I had expected to see the regular depressing glum of military barracks, rotten cafeterias, and janky armories. Instead, the gap in the wood presented me with an entire community. Families of Felebranos filled the lively town center, tending to lush crops and cooking hot meals. We had not gotten a chance to see it from the outside due to our subterranean entrance, so the titanic size of the place was the greatest shock of all. Scents of herbs and perfectly cooked meats invaded my olfactory senses, as the warm candlelight danced in my pupils happily. Conversations, laughter, and love could be heard from every corner of this place. I was terrified. Zeal called it a fortress, I stuttered. But it is a city.
And what does that mean?
Asked Chuck.
Like, a lot more soldiers than you thought?
No, I said, taking a deep breath. A lot less. Barely any soldiers in sight. Nick gave me a confused look and asked,
What about that has you so scared?
He doesn't have the spine to kill civilians, that's what.
Answered Autumn, catching on quickly for the sake of being smug. On some level, she was right. Before breaking it down, the idea of having to incinerate all of these people disturbed me. But then a new thought appeared. Those warriors were undisturbed as they drove an axe into George's skull. Sure, he was a combatant, but he was not involved in a conflict until that moment. They dragged him into war and killed him without a shred of consideration. They believed their purpose was so great that it could justify such horrors. My purpose is even greater. Therefore, I can justify much greater horrors. These people, if you could even call them that, were compliant in the division of Hanyam. They were feeding a disease that may grow to kill us all. On a larger scale, their deaths would be mercy for the rest of us. The children among them would grow to be combatants. The elderly among them were likely combatants in the past. And the remainder support the violence of their spouses and friends through supply lines. Turning these civilians to ash would be a service to the ultimate goal of Mynah.
Civilians?
Asked the still confused Nick.
We would have to evacuate the fort of any non-combatants before starting the fire. You all know that.
Give it a rest, Nick, I sighed. It was hard enough to convince myself this was okay.
There he is.
The hell?
Spat Nick, only making things worse.
You are all willing to go out there and smoke out a ton of innocents?
Autumn and I did not respond. Our answers were already clear.
Well,
Began Chuck.
I'm not going to be the one to go against those orders. If anything, it'll be Major Zeal on tribunal, not us. We're kids. We don't know any better.
I am not talking about consequences for us,
Shouted Nick, now fed up with all three of his siblings.
I am talking about how wrong this is.
That is enough, Private, I said, ending the debate. Corporal, take Private Charles with you. Maintain stealth and get it done quickly. Make sure you have a way out, and they do not. Am I understood?
Yes, Sergeant Aurum, sir,
answered Autumn, as she happily hopped up the ladder, moved the board aside, and slipped out into the plaza without a sound.
You really are your father's children.
I do not appreciate your attitude about all of this.
I don't appreciate your newfound willingness to kill innocents, Zed.
That is not for you to be concerned about, Private.
Yes, it is, Zed. Obviously it is. You are my brother, and I love you. I know you're not really like them, and it hurts to watch you try to be.
A lot has changed, Nicholas.
What, Zed?
You are going to have to ask a more specific question than that.
What changed? What happened on your deployment?
Why do you need to know so badly?
I've already answered that, Zed. Just tell me.
I had wanted to tell him the whole time. He was the only person I could talk about this with, but I had refused to until that moment. I fell in love. They killed him. Nick took a second to process all of this. He only addressed my sexuality with a somber look, as if he understood everything. Then, I watched as his realization washed over him.
Our minds are better navigators than our hearts, Zed.
What the hell is that supposed to mean?
Please, don't hurt these people because of what happened out there.
My passion is what gives me the strength I need to save Hanya, Nick. He knew he could not get through me. He understood that this time, the damage was too great. I watched as his posture shifted from pleading to empty. Nick had finally given up on me.
All right,
He mumbled.
where is Zebulon?
I nodded with appreciation for his compliance and started up the ladder. When I looked back through the gap, everything was different. Soldiers ran by, panicked and armed. I could hear clattering and pained shouts. The siege had begun, as had the fire. A cloud of dark smoke had given the courtyard a ceiling, ruining the formerly pleasant scent of the area. Without any moonlight getting through, the perimeter seemed to be dark enough for us to go unnoticed with little effort. We will find him, I answered. Stay close. I leapt out of the hole and out into the fort. Lurking against the edge of the wall, we made it to the entrance of the main hall. Almost everything was made of thick logs, creating a firm but flammable structure for the entire fort. It seemed to go on forever, like a labyrinth of wood and candles, interrupted by only the occasional door. A facility of this size could likely house hundreds, and based on the implied importance of the mission, it certainly did. Armored soldiers rushed past us with such urgency and helmet-induced tunnel vision that they failed to notice us at all. Corner after corner, and hall after hall, we slipped by without any sound loud enough to be heard over all the commotion. To find my way, I simply stuck to either the tallest or the widest hall, assuming that the most physically important route would guide us to the most important man. This assumption was proven correct. Once we turned a corner and came upon a grand set of doors, guarded by 2 gruff-looking guards. "Nick, watch my back for any others," I ordered as I drew up both swords. The soldier on the left began to visibly panic, reaching for a rope on the wall. Presuming the rope led to a bell for communication, I decided to take no chances and sent my blade clean through his oversized forearm with a firm throw. The sound of the cut was satisfying, as was watching his dismembered arm clatter to the floor. Horrified at the sight of his mutilated peer, the other soldier charged at me with a clumsily assembled battle hammer. After a hasty parry, I kneed him in the crotch with an armored plate. As he stumbled backward in pain, I moved my blade back into position to quickly decapitate him. Before his head even had the chance to roll off his lifeless shoulders, I had brought that same blade through the heart of the first guard. Together, they collapsed to the ground, like the worthless sacks of organs they were. I collected my weapons and turned back to face Nick, who was taking one last check at the halls behind us.
"We're clear to enter,"
said Nick, averting his gaze from the violent remains. "Perfect," I responded. "Remember to help me clear the room as soon as we enter, just like in training." Nick nodded. I raised my bloodied blade once more to slice through a flimsy chain on the door and pushed my way in. The room was much nicer than the rest of the fort, sporting soft carpet and large skylights, which let in crisp beams of moonlight. Apart from the natural light and that which leaked out from the hall, it was dark. And apart from the echo of the door's initial creak, it was equally silent. The still air made me understandably uneasy.
"Sergeant Zed Aurum and Private Nicholas Aurum,"
greeted an unfamiliar voice.
"I am quite glad to see you two here."
At the far end of the room there was an old throne. It looked like an artifact, worn smooth with age. Had it not been in such a grand position, it could have been easily mistaken for a pile of rubble. On it sat the largest man I have ever seen. His rough pink skin blended into the shadows, making the glimmer of moonlight in his eyes, armor, and smile the only proof of his presence beyond his voice. He glared wickedly, like a hungry animal, excited to sink its teeth into its prey. His armor confirmed all of the Federation's greatest fears, as it was undoubtedly made of gilded indigalo. Having never seen a large amount of it at once, the visual was hard for me to comprehend. Gilded boars, the sacred animal of the sorcerers, shed only a pound of gilded ivory annually. Judging by the nearly gold chartreuse color of his plates, the suit must have been about half ivory and half indigalo. Such a quantity, in the hands of a non-sorcerer, was genuinely unthinkable. Yet here he was, sitting before us. Cutting through armor like that would be impossible, considering our comparably standard equipment, and reaching his unprotected head would not be feasible due to his unnatural height.
"Minister Zebulon Aulalo of Falabron, by order of King Mynah Smith the Ninth of the Indigalo Federation, you are under arrest,"
stuttered Nick, struggling to push the words out.
Please, let this be easy and come with us.
I could feel the ground shake as the beast of a man rose from his throne and stomped towards us, slowly. His boulder-like muscles shifted menacingly as he moved. He must have been nearly 8 feet tall, yet the glimmering plates of impenetrable armor managed to cover every inch of his massive body regardless. His bald head was almost as wide as it was tall, sporting a sort of facial muscularity only possible with the strongest of Felabrano genes. Sharp teeth jutted up from his jaw with a horrific underbite, and his eyes were like dark reflective stones, examining us for weakness. We should have brought some sort of explosive or projectile, because there truly was no way for 2 mortal men to bring down a giant like this.
I demonstrate that I know your names and ranks.
He spoke in such a low voice that only its immense resonance made him understandable.
Yet you believe I would not know why you are truly here.
What do you know? I asked, buying time as my mind raced to find a reasonable way to slay him.
Young Aurum, it would be a much quicker affair if you asked for that which I do not.
He laughed, stomping even closer.
I know you have no intention of giving me a trial. I know you will not even take me in. I know you are here only to kill me and save Inkar Zeal's racist hide.
Nick was stunned.
No, you are mistaken, Minister.
Zebulon's grin grew even greater, splitting his old scarred face like a bottomless ravine.
Not once have I been mistaken. Not once have I failed to predict the next step in your regime's endless cruelty. My spies are sharp, and my mind is sharper. I challenge you to tell me something I do not know.
This was another opportunity to keep the conversation going, so I quickly took advantage of it while taking a slow step back. This place will go up in flames, Aulalo. Your forces are surrounded by the largest Federation deployment this century. If you make this easy for us, we might do you the honor of taking prisoners of your people, rather than sending them all to a mass grave.
Zed, what?
Asked Nick, confused by my tactic. Zebulon, as a big talker in every way, was clearly excited by this opportunity to gloat even more.
Zed Aurum, do you even know what you are? Because I do. I am the only one outside of your military's high command who has any concept of your significance. You are a weapon like no other, yet you have managed to blind yourself to the identity of your user.
You have heard of me in particular? I asked, out of more genuine curiosity.
Of course I have heard of the most promising in the batch,
exclaimed Zebulon, as though any other answer would be preposterous.
We both know your father has raised you and your siblings from birth with the sole purpose of developing perfect soldiers. But my insight goes even further. I know the hand he has played in every aspect of your life. And why? What do you know of wrath, my boy?
I did not answer, as I knew where he was going with this, and grew terrified of the logical destination.
Wrath is a legend told to keep the fella Brano and Gisharan afraid of hurting humans.
Chimed Nick.
It is nothing more.
Zebulon shook his head with disappointment as he continued his march toward us.
I forgive your ignorance, as I know it is only your youth. The longer you live, the more you realize that all legends are derived from old truths. Just as the sorcerers conduct lightning through their spears with the guidance of Mynah's gift, all humans harbor an ancient power within themselves. It was a gift to ensure no cruelty against a human would ever go unpunished. But your father intends to misuse it.
By this point, he had pushed us halfway across the room, and we were quickly approaching the main door. My mind still went blank.
Wrath was the only real threat against the Federation.
He chuckled.
So Zed Aurum came up with a plan. Have you ever noticed how grave misfortune seems to follow you wherever you go? That is him. George Perdite was not an accident, and neither were the horrors of your childhood. It has all been a masterful orchestration of torture to make you stronger, by beating your soul until it bleeds plasma onto the Federation's enemies, flushing any spark of resistance.
How do you know his name? I barked, ignoring the rest of his speech. Zebulon lowered his head.
It was no accident, Zed, and I truly am sorry for your loss. Every one of my allies has lost everything to your regime too, and that is why we fight this fight despite our odds. Please.
Your troops killed him.
They were tipped off by your father.
You killed George and then lie in your moment of weakness? What sort of a leader are you? I could feel the warmth of the blood in my face. Zebulon's apologetic approach quickly faded as I felt my back bump into the door.
This is not weakness, Zed. This is mercy. I only extend this mercy to you two out of respect for what you have endured. But ultimately, you are still weapons that I cannot allow to return to the hands of your makers. By default, humans are enemies until they choose to defect.
Zed?
Asked Nick, eager for direction, as he had also run out of room to backpedal. Zebulon drew a massive yet sharp sword from his hip, forged of the same threatening material as his armor.
They sent you here to kill me, thinking you were ready. But I know you are not. If you do not renounce your allegiances and take my offer in pursuing your vengeance, I will, regrettably, have to remove you from the equation of this war entirely.
I would be lying if I wrote I had not considered it. My hatred for my father was true common ground between us. But then, I remembered who I was dealing with. Whether or not he chose to admit it, Aulalo was a desperate man in this moment. His forces were drawn thin and surrounded, and his plea to me should not have been heeded as anything greater than a shot in the dark. My mind was made up once I heard the crackle of burning logs above us. I turned briefly to Nick, with the hope that he would be able to understand what I was doing, just off a helmeted glance. But his posture remained confused. "Please, Minister Aulalo, help me," I begged, dropping to my knees and driving my swords into the floorboards as an act of submission. With my head lowered, I could not tell, but by the sound of his voice it seemed as though Zebulon was smiling, as he said,
"My allies will be glad to have you on board as such a valuable asset, Zed. Thank you."
As he finished his sentence, I yanked my blades from the wood and swung them together from opposite directions through a small gap beneath his knee armor I had spotted earlier. The cut was precise, but shallow, flinging only a bit of blood out as each sword emerged on the other side. The massive man was caught off guard by this sharp pain, and immediately tripped forward. By the time Nick had dodged his forceful tumble into the door, I had already sprinted to the opposite side of the room. The floor and walls shook with the transfer of weight, and the ceiling supports began to splinter as gallons of ash gushed into the air from above. An explosion of fire burst through the wall above the door, doubling the temperature around me. I ducked down behind the old throne to minimize damage, as I heard massive charred logs tumble down in the direction of the door. By the time the noise had stopped, and the air had become somewhat translucent, fire was everywhere. "Nicholas!" I shouted as I jumped to my feet. "Nick! Where are you?" The roar of the flames and the splintering of the wood were all I could hear, apart from the distant sounds of battle. Where Zebulon and the door once were, there was now only a pile of debris. As I looked closer, I realized I could see the glimmer of Nick's blue armor peeking out on one of the sides. I dove in, dragging him out from beneath what must have been a ton of Gesherin oak, and into a recovery position with his helmet off. His body was almost entirely intact, apart from his feet, which had been grotesquely flattened. The armor on his boots had been bent in such a way that it dug into his flesh, so I made sure to remove it. Like everything else, it was so hot to the touch I could feel it through my gauntlets. Just as I began preparing to cauterize the wounds on his legs, I heard a dreadful rumbling deeper in the pile. Exactly as I had hoped would not happen, an armored golden hand reached up from the top and dragged the rest of Zebulon Aulalo to the surface.
"You are a clueless child in a world of gods,"
spat the minister angrily.
"They will never love you, no matter how much you let them use you. You could never pillage enough to quench their greed."
His armor was without a scratch, and if it were not for the thick layer of blood coating his face and head, there would be no sign of any collapse on him. "I dropped a fortress on you, and you still cannot shut up?" I yelled, baffled by his endless supply of meaningless words. At this he smiled, revealing his sharp, yellow teeth beneath the red sea of blood he called a face.
There is always so much to say, but if you insist, I will waste not a second more.
He pulled his foot out from beneath the pile, and then the other. As he began to stumble down the hill of fiery logs, I jumped back, holding my swords up defensively. He laughed at my stance, and I could hear the sound of his blood gargling under his tongue. Half blindly, he swung at me, allowing me the space to easily dodge. His sword was so huge that I could feel the wind in its wake from beneath my mask. Realizing his error, I watched as he used his other arm to scrape the blood from his eyes, revealing those dark pebbles I had not missed the sight of. The sound of his gilded gauntlets scraping against his skin, slicing bits of pink flesh from his face as it moved, chilled me to the core. Taking a second look around with his regained vision, Aulalo spotted something of interest.
Look who else is still here!
He exclaimed as he placed his boot on Nick's unconscious skull.
No!
I shouted, rushing to throw both of my swords towards his head. Without any need for effort, he carelessly swiped his hefty blade through the air, deflecting both of my weapons into the cloud of thick black smoke.
It seems as though my sources were wrong about your empathy and intelligence,
Mocked Zebulon as he turned his attention away from me and onto Nick.
At least you will get to feel a sliver of the pain that Felibron feels tonight.
I heard the cracking of bone and the clanking of the armored boots as the pressure on his head woke Nick up in a panic.
Zed? Zed!
He screamed as the whites in his eyes quickly faded into a dark red. I remember the smoke around me, shifting from black to purple. I remember the heat crawling across my skin as the plasma ignited. I remember the terror reflected in Zebulon's eyes as the energy burst out of me, surging toward him in a dark, smoky tendril of hate. The force of it all launched me backwards into a pile of rubble, crumbling into a bed of ash on impact. What I remember most, though, is what came after. I was drained, nauseous, and barely able to think. The wrath had taken everything out of me, just to be unleashed, and even the weight of my armor was enough to force my weakened body to the floor. Purple and black sparks drifted around me as I fought to keep my eyes open. By the time I had gathered the strength to get up, Nicholas was gone. I collapsed over him and took a moment to examine what really transpired. His skull was not crushed. It was actually one of the few things left mostly intact, alongside bits of his Indigalo armor. The flesh on his face was almost all burned away, and his blood had dried into a chalky crust around his fatal wounds. Technically, I had killed him. A year ago, a detail like that would have mattered to me. But by this point, I was already hollow. To his side lay the dying minister, with half of his face burned off. Beneath his thick layer of muscle was a skull that was indistinguishable from that of a human. I could see through every layer of his head, like a haunting cross-section of the monster responsible for my greatest agony.
I get it now. That was my purpose in his plan. To kill your brother.
Zebulon choked on his own blood as it vaporized in his singed throat. He tried and failed to laugh at the predicament, instead convulsing into a paroxysm of coughs that ripped through what organs he had left.
I suppose the path to freedom truly does remain unfriendly to the souls of its patrons, and I will be no exception.
I hated how his half of a face moved as he spoke. In pursuit of silence, I clenched my fist so hard the armor on my fingers began to scrape against itself, and slammed it down into his exposed jaw. In one quick motion, I had accelerated the process of his death to a decisive end. Finally, I was alone. Once it was quiet, I collapsed next to Nick and looked up at the stars. After a while, the smoke had cleared enough that I could see all the way up and breathe safely. I remembered stargazing with my siblings when we were young, trying to guess which star was Sol, the sun of the old world. Autumn would always tell us that only Mynah knows, and it was a waste of time. Chuck would take her side, as always. Despite that, Nick and I would always try to agree on one that felt like home. I guess that was a waste of time too, because how the hell was I supposed to know what home feels like? Once our sun had made it over the horizon, I got back up and began lifting Nick out of the rubble. He was depressingly light. After a long trek through what felt like a mile of ash and burning wood, I finally made it to the recognizable nothingness of the desert. Out in the distance, I could see two piles of bodies. Thankfully, the human pile was much smaller. Federation soldiers dashed past me, in a hurry to aid others. A few of them took glances at Nick before carrying on, realizing there was clearly nothing left to do. Others chained up Felabrano warriors, particularly the uninjured adults. They were lined up together and marched off into the desert, presumably towards some sort of Federation labor camp or factory. The children were nowhere to be seen, but I could not have cared less. Eventually, I came upon two familiar sets of armor.
Is he dead?
Asked Chuck, as a testament to his dullness. I did not answer, instead only giving him an empty stare through my mask. Thankfully, this scared him into understanding.
Private,
Commanded Autumn out to a stranger.
Get an officer's casket over here as soon as possible. Hesitate and I'll kill you.
A random soldier in the distance nodded and hurried off, returning moments later with a couple of others and the requested casket. Two soldiers placed it at my feet, while another opened the lid. They attempted to take Nick from my arms, but I managed to get rid of them all with another stare. Gently, I placed Nick down into the sad box. There was a little velvet pillow for his head, and quotes from Mynah were engraved all around. After one more glance, I closed the lid and knelt over it with every kind of exhaustion.
I'm sorry for your loss, Zed.
Autumn said nervously. I stood up quickly and angrily. This is a loss for all of us, is it not?
Yes, of course.
She agreed.
But you know what I meant.
I did.
What about Zebulon?
Asked Chuck in a rude attempt to move past Nick. What about him? I bit back, maintaining my anger.
Did you
He paused.
kill him?
Obviously, I did not allow the man responsible for this to live a moment longer, I shouted, startling Chuck.
Oh,
Laughed Chuck, rightfully terrified of me.
well, at least there's a silver light.
Without letting him finish that disgusting statement, I clocked him right in the chin, launching him backward and knocking him out cold. The way his limp body tumbled down the dune and into a pit of soft sand is burned into my memory.
Zed!
Ridiculed Autumn.
Get a grip!
You'll never understand!
You really think that? We are the only ones who could ever understand.
She argued, believing I was anywhere near reasonable.
Hell, if anything, you've got it easy. Almost everyone just lets you get away with these pathetic little outbursts because they're afraid of you. I know this is a terrible day for you, but under no condition will I tolerate you hitting your brother.
What makes you think you can't be angry too? How are you any more of a victim in all of this?
The only reason I'm alive is that one of Father's servants refused to drown me at birth. To him, you're perfect and I barely make the cut. I don't get room for error. I don't get to be upset when we have to do something terrible. I have to be perfect or they'll kill me.
The heightened state of emotions was almost enough for me to oust myself for the sake of argument. But I was able to hold back. Instead, I simply told her, "You don't know the half of it, Autumn. These outbursts are the only reason they made us in the first place." Confused by my cryptic statement, she did not respond. In fact, we have not spoken since.